Welcome back to our series on the Gospel of Matthew. Today we're diving into chapter 6, which continues Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. In this chapter, Jesus teaches us about the true heart of spiritual practices, like giving, prayer, and fasting, as well as where to place our trust and treasure. Let's explore this together. Jesus begins chapter 6 by addressing the way we give to those in need. He warns us to be careful not to practice our righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. He goes on to say that when we give, we shouldn't make a show of it like the hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, announcing their generosity to win praise. Instead, Jesus tells us to give in secret, so secret that your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. In other words, our giving should be done humbly and quietly, with our focus on God, not on receiving recognition from others. This teaching reminds us that God cares more about the posture of our heart than the size of our gift. When we give out of genuine love, without seeking praise, God sees and rewards us. Next, Jesus turns to the topic of prayer. He again warns against doing it for show, like the hypocrites who pray loudly in public places just to be seen by others. Instead, Jesus tells us to go into a private room and pray to our Father, who is unseen, reminding us that God sees what is done in secret. Then, he gives us a model for prayer, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. This prayer is simple, yet profound. It begins by acknowledging God's holiness and His will, then moves to our daily needs, provision, forgiveness, and protection from temptation. It's a prayer of dependence on God, both for our physical needs and our spiritual strengths. Jesus shows us that prayer is not about fancy words or lengthy speeches. It's about a sincere heart that seeks God's will and trusts in His care. After addressing giving and prayer, Jesus talks about fasting. Once again, He warns against making a spectacle of our fasting. He says, "When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting." Instead, Jesus tells us to go about our day as usual, wash our face and anoint our head, so that no one knows we are fasting except for God. This point is clear. Fasting, like giving and prayer, should be done for God's eyes only, not to impress others. Jesus calls us to an authentic relationship with God, where our spiritual practices are not for show, but an expression of our devotion to Him. Then, Jesus gives us a powerful teaching about where to place our trust and treasure. He says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Jesus is calling us to think about what we value most. Are we investing our lives in things that are temporary, like wealth, possessions, or status? Or are we focusing on things that have eternal value, like our relationship with God and the way we love and serve others? This teaching reminds us that our hearts follow what we treasure. If we prioritize worldly things, our hearts will be tied to them. But if we prioritize God's kingdom, our hearts will be aligned with Him. Jesus continues this theme by addressing one of the biggest struggles we all face: worry. He says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is life not more than food, and the body not more than clothes? He reminds us to look at the birds in the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet God feeds them. He also points to the flowers in the field, how beautiful they are clothed, even though they don't labor or spin. Jesus' point is simple. If God cares for the birds and the flowers, how much more will He care for us? He goes on to say, "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Instead of worrying about tomorrow, Jesus calls us to trust God for today, knowing that He will provide for our needs. This teaching is a call to live with a deeper trust in God's provision, believing that He knows what we need and He will take care of us. Matthew chapter 6 is filled with practical and powerful teachings. Jesus challenges us to examine our motives in giving, prayer, and fasting, and He invites us to store up treasures in heaven rather than on earth. Above all, He calls us to trust in God's provision and to seek His kingdom first. In the next episode, we'll dive into Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus wraps up the Sermon on the Mount with teachings on judgment, prayer, and living wisely. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to continuing this journey through Matthew's Gospel with you.